video, I'm going to talk through all of the privacy and security settings that are available to you in your Bubble editor. Now, there are various levels of security. We're talking about access to your editor, access to your database, creating custom permissions and roles for your users, both on a user level and a data type level. And so I'm just going to point out where all of these settings are and help you understand what your options are in general. So the first section is under your settings tab here, and then the general settings. The top area is all about privacy and security. This isn't the only section. This is just one of the primary ones for getting access to your app. So the first one is application rights. You have three options here: private app, everyone can view, everyone can edit. Keep your application on private app as much as possible. There really is no reason to switch over to everyone can view or edit unless you need someone to access the back end of your app to help you with something, if they are co-building with you, and you are not on a professional plan or above, because the professional plan allows you to add collaborators, and that gives you more individual-based access to the app. Whereas doing everyone can view or everyone can edit, this is just kind of anyone who has access to your editor. So if they have this link here, they can see your editor, which means they can see your data. They could end up changing things. Obviously, the everyone can view is a read-only setting, so they wouldn't be able to edit anything. Everyone can edit is as if your editor is completely wide open and they have control over your whole app. So definitely be careful with this one. Keep it on private app, and really only change it if you're looking for someone to help you with something in your application and you're not able to add collaborators. Limiting access to the app with a username and password will add a browser lock on the application. So when you check this, here's my test username and password, then a lock will appear on the preview page of your application. Now, this is a paid feature, so I'm not going to be able to show this right here, but you can certainly test this out when your application is on a paid plan. But basically, when you run the page, like if I were to preview this page here, right now I have this turned on, but I'm not on a paid plan, so it's kind of giving me like, I'm like in a limbo state here. If I were on a paid plan, then I would see that lock where I would have to enter in this username and this password. There's no other way to update or change this. Users do not create this data or these values. This is an application level lock. You can have this show up in both the live and development mode or just the development mode. Now, what I recommend doing is having this on for your development mode only. You can have it on in live, of course, if your application is still under construction and you have deployed the app and you just don't want anyone finding it yet. But you will want to remove that in most cases because you're not going to want your users to interact with this lock. This really should just be treated as a lock to keep the app internal while you're still building it. Of course, if you're building a completely private app that should not be available to the public and you want to provide this extra layer of security, then by all means, have this on and have it on for both the development and live. But I would say at minimum, private app up here and have your username and password set up for the development mode at least, okay? The live mode is probably not going to be applicable to you. You're probably going to want to have that off at all times just because you don't want your users interacting with it. But anyway, so then below that, you have define a password policy. I'm going to uncheck this here because my app won't be previewable with that on. Okay, so define a password policy lets you require certain constraints when users for your application are signing up. You can have them you can require a certain number of characters and a certain type of character. So you can they have to at least have a number, they have to at least have a capital letter, and at least a special character. Whatever you select here will generate a policy that Bubble will check against. if a user tries to sign up with a password that does not meet these requirements, then they'll see an error on the page. So what you should do is be very clear in what the requirements are on that sign up page so that they know what they need to fill in, right? So enabling this allows you to enforce a policy like that. Redirecting users who haven't changed their password is usually, this is going to be for anyone who you've created a temporary password for, so that they don't stay logged in or remain with that password associated to them. You do want them to change their password and take control over that value. So if you select a page here and the user has logged in with a temporary password, they will first be taken to a page that you select here. Normally what you would want to do is create a separate page specifically for this purpose, which is to update the logged in user's credentials and to change their password. This is just a security feature to make sure that your users are taking complete ownership over their account. If you ever need to assign a temporary password, you do want to make sure that they update it pretty soon after they've logged in with that temporary password. You also have the ability to create two-factor authentication in your application. This is a slightly more advanced privacy feature, but definitely worth it if your application data is more sensitive and you want your users to feel comfortable and secure with logging into your app, and not only feel that way, but actually give them that extra layer of security. So there is an entire process for setting this up. It's explained pretty well in the Bubble reference. So if you need help with this, please reach out. I'm really just going to point out that this feature is here in this lesson today. The next few options are a little bit more advanced too. If you want to automatically create, oh, sorry, I skipped one here. You can prevent your application from being embedded in other websites. It's actually very easy to embed a website within a website with a simple line of HTML code. So you can prevent this from happening by changing the settings here. If you block all frames, then it means that no website can embed your application. If you allow with same origin, then that means only websites that are on the same domain as your application will be able to embed any pages from your app. And then allow all iframes will just completely give free access for your application to be embedded anywhere. I would definitely keep this on block unless you have specific reasons to allow iframing and embedding. Make a new data type private by default with a privacy rule placeholder. What this means is that anytime you create a new data type in your data type section here, Bubble will automatically create a default data role so that by default, your data will be private. And you'll have to adjust that automatic role because without this checked in your settings, which is the default behavior here, that it's not checked. Without that checked, all of your roles will be created with no privacy rules. They will all be visible by everyone. Okay, so you would have to come in here and intentionally create privacy rules for each one of your data types. So a handy feature is that you can check this so that by default, all of the new data types that you end up creating, they automatically have a rule. Slight inconvenience for this is that you do have to go in and modify the role immediately because it would be, you'll start previewing your application and you'll be blocked from accessing the app until you define a role that lets you see the data. So while it's slightly inconvenient, it could be worth the trade-off of accidentally exposing data you do not want to expose. And then you have your cookie setting, which is very handy for people who are in the EU and need to comply with GDPR and basically anyone else that needs to be very explicit about collecting cookies on their users. Essentially, the default behavior is that Bubble will collect cookies. So you need to, if you want to change that behavior, you need to check this box. Bubble will not collect cookies for new visitors, And this, by checking this box, you've actually exposed some actions in your workflows, which can be found under Account here. And at the bottom, you can now program a workflow to opt the user into cookies or opt them out. The use case would be something like showing the user a checkbox that says, yes, I accept cookies, or allow cookies, whatever it might be. So the user would have to check a box or click a button for you to specifically run this action and opt them in to collecting cookies. If they change their mind and uncheck the box, or they click a button that says, please stop tracking me, or whatever it might be, then you can run the opposing action to opt them out. But these only show up here when you have this checked, because without it checked, you'll have the default bubble behavior, which is to automatically collect cookies no matter what. All right, so that is your general privacy and security settings. Another area that I want to point out is under your API section. So by default, your app will not expose Workflow API nor Data API. These are public endpoints. They are basically addresses to different parts of your app that external services can access. So for example, Zapier or Slack or a Google account could call a URL endpoint on your application to retrieve data or run workflows that you've set up in your API workflows section. We haven't touched on that too much in this course yet, but API workflows are a way to create server-side workflows, and those can be called from external applications. It creates incredibly powerful functionality, really amazing stuff that lets you connect your app to outside world. But you want to be careful with it. You do want to make sure that your privacy settings are set up properly, so that only the people you know or the services you're aware of are accessing and no one else. So when you check this box, then you will have this new section here in your editor to create API workflows. And this section looks very much like a regular workflow area for a page, but this is a server-side section. This is not associated with any pages. There's actually nothing to design, so we can see this is grayed out. This is stuff that runs in the background. If you think about things that you want to create where you can schedule things to happen far in the future, or create recurring events like sending an email every week or something like that, this is where you would create that functionality, because these server-side endpoints can be scheduled. And not only that, this is where you would build much more complex workflows that work on your database a little more heavily. If you ever have to do batch processing on many, many records, it's a much better idea to have them happen here rather than on the page, because the user doesn't need to have a page open for the workflow to complete. Once an API endpoint has been scheduled, it will run, of course, if you have everything set up properly, if there's no errors or anything like that. But the user can schedule an endpoint and close the page, and the endpoint will still run at that scheduled time. So all of this to say, when you create endpoints, you have a couple of privacy options here. Where you can say the endpoint can be run without authentication. So obviously by default, that's not checked. You can expose this endpoint as a public endpoint, because these endpoints can also be run internally. So you can have your own users call these endpoints from within the app, from within other pages, and schedule things, or you can expose it as a public endpoint and have some outside service trigger this endpoint and run a workflow in your app. So an example would be if you have a transaction go through on PayPal, PayPal can notify your application by calling this endpoint via API and sending it some data payload about the transaction. And as a result, you have some actions run. Maybe you send yourself an email, maybe you create a record in your database, whatever it might be. Again, very powerful, but you do want to make sure that you're only giving services access that you are aware of. And this also has a checkbox for ignoring privacy rules, because when you run workflows, you're running as a user. So if you have privacy rules set up, to prevent or give access under specific user roles, then these workflows might not work properly. So you can choose to ignore that if you want. I'm going to remove that. We'll talk about API workflows in a little bit more detail in an upcoming lesson, but that is a section that if you are working with APIs that you want to be aware of. So like workflow APIs, you also have privacy settings for your data API. So this is the public endpoint for accessing data. You do have URLs that anybody could just kind of type into their web browser or make a call via API to access your database. So by default, this is not turned on. You have to intentionally turn this on, and you have to intentionally enable and expose each of your data types. So you do have a couple of layers that are protecting you by default anyway, but if you do need to expose your database to some external service, which can happen, it certainly happens with sophisticated apps that are being connected to other applications out there. And again, a very, very powerful, useful feature when you need it. But if you don't need it, just keep this off. There's really no need to have this enabled. So by enabling them, you are exposing them, and these work hand in hand with your privacy rules as well. So you can see that, let me see if I can enable, I'm going to enable application here and go back to data and application. So as soon as I enabled that, I should have, let me see if I missed a setting here, expose data API. All right, now go back here. So I can see I have extra checkboxes that have shown up. I can modify via API, delete via API, or create. This essentially is saying external services can change things in your database if you're allowing them to. So you have to intentionally expose that to make that happen. Just a privacy setting you should be aware of. Okay, and then the collaboration tab lets you invite other Bubble users to work on your app with you. It basically gives them access to your editor. In fact, it will add the app to their own Bubble dashboard because they are being shared. Basically, you're sharing the app with them. If you are the owner of the application, then you have complete control over what these collaborators see. So you can make them an admin or not. Non-admins cannot see any app plan data. There's also some privacy settings that are concealed. Also, domain settings are concealed from non-admins. Generally what a non-admin can do is edit the application, but not make any changes to the settings of the application. And then you can also specify further what type of access they have to the app, how much data they can, or what they can do with the data, whether they can view or edit or view only, what they can see regarding the logs, or if they only have access to the development version and not the live version of the application. So another privacy setting, because this does involve giving access to your app to specific people. All right, now the next section for privacy is, of course, your privacy rules. I have gone over this in a much earlier lesson in this course. So if you want to understand how this works and you missed that lesson, please go back and watch that one. I show you how to create rules for your different data types. And these are essentially global settings for accessing data as some user in your application. So these do have a very big impact over the behavior of your application, often to the detriment of development. If you forget about your roles, stuff can, not show up, and you can forget about why, it can be hard to troubleshoot if you don't remember that you have roles in here. But if you're using the debugger properly, Bubble will tell you that a privacy rule is being applied, and so that's why you're not seeing any data for some reason. But this is very worth putting in the time to create privacy rules, because security should always be an important thing to keep in mind from the very beginning. Now, outside of these settings that are built into the editor, there are a couple of other things that you can do to make sure that users are accessing pages and workflows and elements that only they should be accessing and nothing more. And this has everything to do with how you build your features. I've gone through a couple of examples where we are redirecting users away from pages that they shouldn't see. For example, on the header here, which is a reusable element that I have on all of my internal pages, or I should say any user-facing pages, I have this event here so that anytime a user is logged out and they're trying to load a page that has the reusable element, they're automatically redirected to the index page. So this keeps anyone who doesn't have an account out of the app, right? And they're redirected to our general sign up page, or they can choose to log in if they just happen to be logged out and they were already a part of the application. That is one very easy thing that you can do to redirect users, especially if you're creating pages that are completely internal, if they're admin pages for yourself or test pages that you just don't want exposed. You can do the same type of redirection in the workflow of the page. If user is logged out, redirect. Or if user's email is not, a very specific email address, maybe it's your own email, then move them away. Lots of different ways to do it. It's really just up to your imagination. But the very easiest thing is if you need to keep login only pages away from logged out users, redirect them if they're logged out. The second level of protection that you can be adding in is conditions on your elements. What I usually like to do with all of my pages is hide as much as possible and only show things when they need to be shown. Not only does that help performance, because Bubble will try to load, Bubble will load everything that you need to have visible all at once, especially upon page load. So having only what needs to be visible on page load visible and hiding everything else, and then creating the conditions to make them visible wherever appropriate, that's a little bit easier to control because you don't want to run into a situation where you have elements already visible and your conditions are supposed to hide them from people who shouldn't be seeing them. You should do it in the reverse so that you're giving access intentionally as opposed to taking away access, because you might miss a scenario where something needs to be hidden from someone. And then, if you miss it, then they're seeing it and you could be exposing data that they shouldn't have access to. And then, of course, in the same vein, creating conditions on workflows to make sure that only people who are allowed to be running specific workflows can. So you can create conditions, for example, on the event that says only when this person's email address is XYZ, or only when this person is logged in, or only when this user's company is related to the job post company, something like that. It just depends on your database structure, but you can add in these multiple layers of protection at every step of the way on the workflows, on the events, on the actions, on the elements themselves, and of course in all of your built-in settings in the back end.